contingent love, or what we might call conditional love. It's like, I love you because. And then there's what we call ava she'enei teluya b'davar, which is love that's not contingent on anything, which we would call unconditional love. So we have conditional love and unconditional love. So what is the difference between conditional love and unconditional love? Or more precisely, well, you could say one has a condition, one doesn't. But what are the implications of that? So it says in the same Mishnah, it says that when it comes to conditional love, the danger is that once that condition is satisfied, or once that condition is not satisfied, changes, that's probably a better, more accurate way of saying it, if that changes, the love disappears. So if I love you because of X, Y, and Z, as long as X, Y, and Z is there, the love is there. But the moment X, Y, and Z is no longer there, or changes, and now is not X, Y, and Z, but maybe A, B, C. A, B, C. 1, 2, 3. Okay, right? So the moment that changes, we break out into musical from time and again. From time to time. So the moment that changes, the love is no longer there. Whereas Ava, love that's not contingent on anything, love that's unconditional, so it can withstand, it can last forever. By the way, that's the secret to Kabbalistic dating. What's the secret to Kabbalistic dating? Kabbalistic dating, I'm glad you asked. So the secret to Kabbalistic dating is that you're looking for someone who shares an essential compatibility as opposed to merely an external compatibility. Because we all exist on different dimensions, roughly parallel to the 4 worlds of Kabbalah, or the 4 worlds that Kabbalah teaches, the 4 worlds in existence, Atzilut, Beriah, Yetzirah, and Asiyah, the world of emanation, creation, formation, and action. They roughly correspond within the human experience to the physical, the emotional. Now this is from the lowest up. Physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual. So if the premise of a relationship is merely the physical, which is the most changing, correct? Will we agree with that? Yes? Because no one looked the same at 5 to 15 to 25 to 35 to 45 to 55 to 65, 75, 85, 95, 105. It's not I'm going to use Hebrew words because I don't know how to say it in English. It's not shaykh b'metzias. It's not, you can probably know what I mean when I say that, right? Oh, yeah. It's like self-translates. It's like, it's not even possible. It's not even the realm of possibility that the physical piece shouldn't change. So to base a relationship, to base a love, to base it, the foundation should be the physical, is like building a massive skyscraper on the needle. You know that building in Midtown that looks like a pencil?
Bank of America.
The Bank of America?
Oh, that's downtown.
I'm not sure. It's the one that when in the skyline it looks like a pencil. Yeah? Are you with?
SunTrust.
SunTrust. We have to know this building. I mean, it's right there, right?
Is it the tallest one?
Who knows? Yeah. I don't know. I just know the one that looks like a pencil. But here's my point. If you inverted it and built it on that point, that would be a very bad idea.
Actually, if you were to build the building based off of the outside, not what's on the inside being the foundation, being the steel and the concrete and the non-glamorous, the
right
parts of the building, if you were to build it based off of mirrored windows, then it would not.
It would not. But again, if you build it on something, on a foundation that is ever shifting, or that's a fine point that's not going to be around, then it's a very foolish way to build a building. You mentioned glass, concrete, and other things. Reminds me of the story of the Rabbi who was once repaving his sidewalk in front of his house. And they had poured the fresh cement, the fresh concrete in front of his house. And the neighborhood kids, they noticed it, and they started drawing and making, like writing their names and putting their hands in it. The rabbi looks out his window, a half an hour later, he sees what the kids are doing, and he starts berating them. How dare you? This is private property. I can't believe it. I'm going to call your parents, like all this stuff. Anyway, his wife hears him and she says to him, look, you don't like what's happening, fine, but you always speak about how the children are the future, how the children, we have to love the children and understand the children. Children are amazing. She's like, what about the love for the children? He says, I love children in the abstract, but not in the concrete.
I love
But not in the concrete. Okay, moving along, huh? Yeah, it's an oldie but a goodie. Good, fine. So moving along. So we have love that is based on a specific condition, which is flimsy. If the condition is flimsy, it's flimsy. The love is flimsy. You're building a love, or building love on something that is very transient. It's not a long-lasting methodology. So when I talked about the secrets of Kabbalistic dating, so what that is that the foundation of a relationship should be based on not just, there has to also be physical compatibility, but not just physical compatibility, or the primary should not be the physical piece of it, which is ever changing, but rather the spiritual compatibility. And that requires knowing oneself. What are my spiritual values? What speaks to my spiritual essence? And does this person also share that? See, two people who care deeply about the same things, they're more likely to stick through the difficulties, the inevitable difficulties that arise, because they share a common passion. They share a common goal that's greater than themselves. They share dedication to something higher, and therefore when the selfish, I say selfish, I mean the ego-based divisions come up, as they inevitably do, each party can say, yes, fine, I would like this, you would like that, but there's something greater that we're all committed to, and therefore we will see this through. So again, that's just a bit of an insight into these two models. So it says in Pirkei Avot, again, it says in Ethics of Our Fathers, two types of love. Love that's contingent, love that is not contingent, i.e. essential love. One is lasting, the former is not lasting, the latter is lasting. If you want to know more about these loves, join us Tuesday night or Thursday, little commercial plug, for our Warrior to Warrior class. Our last class is on relationships, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about healthy relationships, whether they're spousal or friendship or business related or community related relationships on all levels, healthy relationships using the tools of Kabbalah and Hasidic philosophy. If you're part of the course, great. If you're not part of the course, come anyway. Doesn't matter. I'm teaching it. I let you come to the course. So come 8 p.m. Tuesday night, or noon Thursday. Yeah.
I'd take a look, or ask to take a look at what you're saying from a slightly different angle and perspective, which is with the unconditional love, if you say that you are loving the person. With the conditional love, you're not really loving the person, you're loving the action or the thing that person is doing. So you're not really loving the person.
Correct. Or more precisely, you're loving yourself. Right. It's like the famous story that I heard for so many years, and I've told for many years, of the rabbi in the yeshiva who goes down to the lunchroom, to the cafeteria, and sees the yeshiva student eating lunch with gusto, very excitedly eating lunch. And he's eating a piece of fish. And he says to the young man, do you like fish? And the man says, I love fish. And he says, you don't love fish. If you loved fish, you would be taking care of fish, feeding fish, protecting the fish. You wouldn't be consuming the fish. That's not love of fish, it's love of yourself. And I always think about this. It's such a simple story, but to me it's so profound. At least to me it feels very profound. That is, a lot of the time, so often when we say love directed to someone else, what we really mean is that we love them insofar as they make us feel a certain way, which is contingent. As long as you make me feel a certain way, I love you because I love me. Or I love feeling a certain way, and I love you making me feel a certain way. I don't really love you. I love my feeling a certain way. Somebody says, they shout on the rooftops, oh, I love you, you make me feel so amazing, you make me want to do amazing things in this world, whatever it is. I don't know if anyone's ever shouted that, but the point is, that's all self-oriented. In fact, in the statement of I love you, who comes first? I. Gewalt. Now try to flip it around, it would be weird. You love I. Okay, fine. I'm not suggesting, it would be hard with words to figure that out. Or you, I love. Maybe that's better. At least the you comes first in that sentence. But even in the construct, again, a simple, etymological construct of I love you, the I is coming before the you. And oftentimes when we talk about love of another human being, it is self-directed. And it's not easy to move toward a selfless place. But it's possible. It's possible. So when it comes to love, as I wrote in the email, and if you're not getting the email, let me know. I say this every week. If you're not getting the email, let me know. We'll get you on the email list. It's just the Sunday Kabbalah Coffee email that usually gives the title, the subject of what we're talking about, or if we're not having class, so that you know not to show up. Or if there's a marathon, so that you know that to avoid the streets. I'm kidding. I didn't know. So how could I write that in the email? Okay, getting back to the point. So it says, as I wrote in the email, based on teachings of Kabbalah and Jewish philosophy, so it's possible that a single unit could break down into division and to dissent also, to fighting, to conflict. And it's possible that that diverse entities could come together in a fabulous unity. So both are possibilities. In other words, when it comes to the idea, the notion of love or oneness, so you can have a oneness that breaks apart, that fractures, and you can have a fractured state that heals, that comes together. I was thinking of this. I didn't want to write it in the email because it would be I felt it would be too elaborate or too complicated for me to explain it accurately, so that it doesn't give the wrong impression. But I was listening to a podcast, I don't know, a month or two ago, that was highlighting, I think it was This American Life episode, and it was about the protests that are going on in Hong Kong. It was chronicling what's been going on over the last few months in Hong Kong. And it talked about how, the different sides of the conflict, the protesters, the police, the Chinese influence. And one thing that came up, which is something that comes up, I think, commonly in these types of situations, is how families are driven apart by the conflict. How you have the children or the teenagers who are protesting, who are anti-police, and their father is a police officer. And how do they deal with it? Well, they don't talk about it. Until Ira Glass or whoever was running that story decided to interview the family together, and that created a little bit of tension. But you have a situation where you have a family unit that was otherwise, let's just say, right, was together, and then you have something that happens that can splinter, that can fracture the family apart. Conversely, you can have a situation where you take strangers that don't know each other, that are divided in various ways, and they can come together in a commonality for a common cause that will unite them as one. So one can become many, and many can become one. It's the nature of things. So in this text, the goal is to understand how many can become one. Because how one can become many, and not in a good way, but in a negative way, in a way of not just diversity, but division and dissent and fighting, that we know, right? We know how one can become many. We've seen that movie play out before. The real trick, right? The goal, when I say trick, I mean like the real, in Yiddish, the kunst, the real, what we really want to get to is understanding how many become one. Isn't it on the penny? Yeah? From many one? That's the goal. How to understand, right? What is that, Latin? It's all Latin to me. But understanding in simple terms, how we go from many to one. How do we get to a state of oneness once there is this division that is so divisive? So we've been talking about the klipa of Midjan. I'm using some Hebrew and Kabbalistic terminology. Klipa means shell or evil force, the klipa of Midjan. Midjan was an ancient nation, but Midjan is a force in our lives, really in the universe. And it's the force of division and conflict and splitting apart. Midjan is the force that splits apart, that divides. And our task is to be like Moses, who is tasked to battle and to fight Midjan. Not the nation Midjan in our lives. We're not meant to pick up arms and fight some nation Midjan, but rather to do whatever is in our power to fight the force of conflict that exists within us and within the community and the world at large, and really the universe. As we said before, conflict has its origins all the way in the supernal world of Tohu, the world of chaos. Why is it chaotic? Because there was conflict amongst the Sefirot, amongst the mystical divine energies. There's conflict, there's division, there's colliding of different elements of the Sefirot, and that creates the shattering of the vessels. So the goal of our reality, really the goal of life itself, the goal of our existence, is to heal the division, is to heal conflict. We live in the world, in the realm of tikkun, of repair. Not because it's already repaired, but because that's our calling, which is tikkun olam, to repair the world. And although that means many different things today, in popular jargon, what it means fundamentally from a Kabbalistic place, which is where the notion begins. It begins with the teachings of the Arizal in the 1500s, the concept of tikkun olam, which is based on a verse from Scripture. The concept originates as developed in Kabbalah and has since then gone viral in many different ways. But the core concept of tikkun olam is to take all of the fragmentation and bring it back to a state of unity. Is to take fragmentation, to take the shattering, to take the broken shards, and one at a time heal them and join them. And this is true amongst people, it's true amongst societies, it's true amongst, in every different level. It's about healing division, healing conflict, healing the splintering and the shattering. That's what we're here for. That's why human beings, I think part of us is very much wired to seek the unity. When you see something out of place, you may want to create some sort of order and symmetry. Right? You ever have the desire to create symmetry? You see a puzzle pieces. You want to put them together and make a single picture out of diverse fragments. So there's a natural human nature to create synthesis, or to create a unity, to create a union of different pieces. At the same time, there's also a natural human tendency to create chaos. Unfortunately, there's a part of us that's driven toward chaos. That when things are going well, let's stir this up. Let's create some chaos. Let's get some. I once heard, I can't tell you if conceptually this is true, but it's an interesting concept. So love is defined in Kabbalah, chesed, ahava, kindness, love. Love is defined as a feeling of closeness and a desire to get closer. It's like magnetic pull towards something or someone else. So love is being drawn toward. So what happens if you get very close and there's nowhere else to go? You with me on the question? I'll reset it just in case. Again, chesed or ahava, kindness or love, the energy is about getting closer. Well, what happens if you already got closer? So now what? But that's no longer. But you're no longer having the opportunity to express love. If love is defined not as a state of closeness, but rather getting closer, feeling a state of closeness, but seeking to get closer, there's a dynamic energy to get closer. So sometimes human beings, when they feel close, they create distance in order to get closer again. Are you with me on this? Again, I'm not saying that it's necessarily true. I'm just telling you that I've heard this. and therefore it may be true. I read it on the internet. I'm kidding. I heard it from a teacher of Kabbalah and Hasidic philosophy. That the notion of love is not only a state of closeness, but it's closeness, but wanting to get even closer. If you feel like you can't get even closer, there is a natural force, something inside that will cause you to create a distance so that you can then overcome it and then have that experience of getting closer. This could explain dynamics in relationships where there are periods of feeling close, but also periods of times of maybe subconsciously creating minor conflicts, perhaps, not in any of our relationships, right? But a state of somewhat of conflict or of separation in order to have that bridging of the gap to get closer. Okay, so the goal of tikkun, let's circle back to the Kabbalistic idea. So the world of Toh, the world of chaos, is a world in which there is conflict, there's division, separation, and shattering. The world of tikkun, the world of repair, is a world in which there is meant to be, not by default, that's where we come in. We're meant to do this, and it's not easy. It's a world in which the objective is to create healing and, remember the computers back in the day? Remember you had a defrag?
Yeah.
Right? Defragment?
Yeah.
Life is running the old defrag. I think today it runs by itself, yeah? Does it? I don't know. I think it's supposed to. Who knows? The point is, the world of tikkun, the world of repair, is a world in which we're meant to heal the division, bring the pieces that are separate, bring them back together, to heal them, to glue them back together as one single unit. In fact, the Arizal teaches, it says in Kabbalah, that every soul is a fragment of the soul of Adam Harishon, the first human being. We're all fragments of that original soul. And we're all meant to have our soul, to allow our soul to shine and to do its mission in the way that it's intended. And when we do that, our soul is lit up, so to speak, in a divine way. Its light is fully shining. And we're able to reconnect with the original soul of Adam, or that piece. Imagine, it's described in Kabbalah like this. Imagine the silhouette of a human form, right? So you have a head, you have a torso, right? You have legs. You have the silhouette of a human body. Everyone's soul, each one of us, and every human being, each of our souls is a piece, is a fragment of Adam's soul, which, let's say, looks like this human form. That's how it's explained in Kabbalah. And when we do what we need to be doing in our lives, our soul is shining, and then it goes back, it illuminates its place within that larger construct, that original soul, so to speak. And when everyone does what they need to be doing, then we have a singularity of a healthy soul. Because all of the particular soul sparks have been doing what they need to be doing. Now, it may sound like a lofty dream, but everyone's going to get on board. What happens if somebody's not on board? Can we get like best out of 5 or we get a majority? This is obviously, we're talking about like the idea of Mashiach, messianic concepts of, when the whole world is on the same page and everyone's soul is illuminated. So do we have to wait for everybody, or can we get like most folks? I'm going to go with majority, because Maimonides says that every person, before they take any action, should think to themselves, like a choice, a moral choice between right and wrong, should imagine that the whole world is hanging in the balance between good and the opposite. Like there's a scale, and on the scale you have exactly equal weights and measures, right? So it's like 50%, half good and half the opposite. And one positive deed could tip the scales for good. And I always go back to Stars and Strikes, the kids' place, or any kids, where they have the game, like the arcade thing. and they have that Vegas style machine where you put coins in, and it's got that shelf that's moving. You know what I'm talking about. It's got the coins that are hanging over the ledge. You put in one. Is anybody with me on this?
Yeah.
You put in one coin, and then the goal is that it should knock the other coins, and then you get tickets that you can then trade in for some sort of like rubbery hand thing that sticks and marks the wall for eternity. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Yeah. Of course, I know marks. I've been there. I have the marks to prove it. Yeah, because you paint it with matte paint because it looked like a nicer finish. The next thing you know, you have all these oil stains on it. I know. I'm also there. We've all been there. Anyway, the point is.
Marks the ceiling too.
The whole time I'm thinking ceiling. I'm totally thinking ceiling because it's totally on the ceiling. There are times in which you don't even notice it's on the ceiling.
The smile over here.
Yeah, right. So right. Becca knows what we're talking about. But here's the point. One coin can push over many coins. Rambam says, Maimonides says, that one good deed can tip the scales of goodness and bring redemption and salvation, right? Bring good stuff for the individual and for the entire world. So do we have to wait for everybody? I don't think everybody, but we need at least 51% or 50.1. And each one of us should always look at the next healing, loving, kind, mitzvah, good deed that we're doing as the one that's gonna end all of the pain and suffering in the world and bring a time of goodness and blessing for us all. Here's the idea. The idea is that we live in a world in which there is fragmentation embedded in the world. Again, our world, as I mentioned some weeks ago, is the product of the shattering of the vessels of Tohu. We are derived from, or we're built on, right? We built this city not on rock and roll, but we built this city on, this universe, our universe, is built on the explosion of the world of chaos and the fragmentation that ensued from a state of inner conflict. So that's our premise. And our task is tikkun. So somebody asks, so why are we here? What's the purpose of life? Easy. Pick up the pieces, bring them together. It's so easy. That's what I tell my kids all the time. You see all that stuff on the floor in your room? Pick it up, put it together. I'm kidding, I don't tell them that. Well, I do, but not in those terms. Right? It's all about defragmentation. It's all about taking the conflict and making it one. This is the antithesis of Midian. Midian is the ancient nation, but turned into concept. Midian is the state of fragmentation, creating division, creating dissent, creating conflict, sowing hate from one to the other. It's all about creating that division. And our job, all of us are the Moses that is meant to fight the Midian. All of us are meant to take all of that division and heal it and bring it together and undo that type of damage, that type of hurt. Make sense? Synonymous with Moses and the antithesis of Midian is the sphere. This is what we said last week. Is the sphere is the energy of Chachma. Chachma is defined as wisdom, but the way I like to define it, Chachma is creative intelligence, creativity. Chachma is creativity, which requires stepping out of oneself. Chachma is not what I know already, but it's me surrendering what I know to gain another wisdom that I don't yet know. In other words, the process, this creative process, is founded upon a surrender of self and an acceptance of something beyond oneself. It's surrendering ego for something outside, something greater than oneself. This quality of ego surrender is at the core of healing, and the opposite, healing fragmentation, and the opposite of fragmentation. Because what sows the greatest division and disunity amongst human beings? It's the sense of ego. It's I versus you. It's my way, not your way. The greatest source of strife, conflict, division, hate, whatever you want to call it, it's all the same thing. The greatest source of midyan is lack of bittul, lack of the ability to let one's ego go. Ego's there. It's an inability to let it go. Holding on to ego creates strife and conflict. That's midyan. Letting go of ego, Lego my ego. Letting go of ego, those commercials still exist? No. All right.
In here, in this room.
In this room.
In your mind.
Ego rises once again. Yeah, it's letting go. Letting go of ego is bittul. Bittul is letting go of ego. That creates a framework for healing, for unity, for love. And it also creates, so again, letting go of ego creates a space for unity, for love, for healing. It's the opposite of midyan, and it's also the prime characteristic of chachma. Chachma is letting go of self to be open to new information or someone else's perspective. Chachma is letting go of self to take in something else. That's the prime quality of healing and unity and love. Yes?
It sounds like Chokmah is like almost like dialectic, the ability, like what results from dialogue, when you allow the other person's truth to disturb yours into enlargement.
Yes. Chachma is the openness to learning, to wanting to learn. Like I mentioned last week that the Mishnah says, again in Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Father, it says, Ezehu Chacham, who is Chacham, who's wise. Again, the same word in Hebrew, Chacham, Chachma, who's wise. And it says, one who is open to learning from every person. Halomed mikol adam, one who learns, who's open to learning from every person. And not just saying, I've got it right, they've got it wrong. See, I'm learning from them what not to do. That's not what it means. It means learning from a person means that they have something to share with me, a different perspective, something. That openness is chachma. It's a marvelous gift that we've been given, that we're not inherently stuck in ourselves. Now, a person can choose to be stuck in themselves. A person can choose to not want to listen to someone else, to not be open to other information or to a dissenting opinion. That's a choice, though. Because in essence, every human being is constructed of the very same 10 sefirot. We all have chachma in our souls. Chachma is threaded through the fabric of the universe. So chachma, the power of bittul, the power of letting go of self and being open to someone else, that power is inherent in the universe and within the human soul. Does it mean that a person will activate it, will act upon it, will channel it? Not necessarily. That's a choice. That's the choice we've been given. But we have within ourselves the key to unity and moving away from this unity, the key to healing dissent, the key to healing hate is already within us, and it originates in the power of chachma within the soul, which, by the way, is the highest of the 10 sefirot.
But you can't get to it without machloket, right?
Well, so you're saying, can you get to the sense of openness to the other's opinion if you don't have someone else's opinion already? I think we already have that, because our world is founded upon the concept of machloket, the concept of division, because we are the product of the shattering of the vessels. So the origin story of our universe already has that conflict sewn into it. It's already there. And then we have also the power of chachma, which is the ability to be open to the other, to the person, across the table. So we have the person across the table, but then we have the power within us to be open to that person, and then we have the choice. Are we going to see that person across the table and say, you're different, you don't get it, I'm right, you're wrong, we have nothing to talk about, I'm done here? Or do we say, let's have a dialogue, let's have a conversation, let's find common ground, or if not even common ground, let's recognize that the other person may see a part of a truth that is a complementary, not the same part, maybe the opposite, but part of a single truth. Because, as we'll discuss today, part of Chachma is recognizing that ideas can split into contradictory notions, but they all stem from the same place, which we're going to get to today. Yeah?
I think that a way of thinking about, I think what you're saying and what you're saying as well, is that if you think about the learning and that openness being separate from the person. So if it is, I'm learning from you, it's your perspective, then there's still ego involved in that. It's being open to that. But if you think about it as a way that I'm seeing the world and someone else seeing the world, and you see it as the sight or what they're seeing or the image or the word, rather than the person who is doing it, it becomes less about accepting the opinion of someone else, but rather saying that we're all putting in the center of the room a perspective, anonymously in a way. And that way, then your vision becomes, or what you're understanding becomes enhanced, because you're connecting to the perspective rather than the person's apostrophe as perspective.
In other words, you're keeping it as objective as possible and less personalized, but more about the idea.
Right, and it's also in the way you do it. Like if you say, well, I think, then you shut that down.
Right.
You say that, and so here's the way that I'm imagining it, or here's as I imagine it. How are you imagining it? You still got the pronouns, but it becomes about the it rather than the person, and that's really hard because there's a sense. Even our language is set up to be, I think, or my opinion is.
Well, it's very interesting that you say that. When the author Joseph Telushkin, very well-known Jewish author, when he came to speak in the summer, in conjunction with the Rebbe's 25th anniversary of his passing, he spoke about the life and legacy of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he said he taught 5 things that the Rebbe was, the Rebbe taught or stood for, or remarkable things about the Rebbe's life and legacy. And one of them is, he mentioned the Rebbe would never personalize debates. It was always about ideas and not people. And he said it's because of that, and he heard this, I forget who mentioned this. I don't know who it was, but somebody mentioned that the Rebbe vehemently disagreed with their position on something, but because it was never about them as a person, number one, they were able to maintain a relationship. There was never any sense of discord, that he didn't feel anything negative toward the Rebbe, and on the contrary, at a certain point, they were able to come together on other topics, and see eye to eye, and it never created a negativity or a negative energy, because it was always about the ideas. And when it comes to ideas, I can disagree, but we can also recognize that there are 2 sides to an idea. So even though I'm on this side and you're on that side, but it's still within the realm of an idea, as opposed to becoming about the person, which really shuts down the conversation and creates and sows conflict. So Midian would always want to personalize it. Moses would always try to think conceptually, right? What Midian stands for, what Moses stands for. So that would be something about making it personal, whereas this would be about depersonalizing.
There's another layer to that too, and that's that if you're, in order to be able to do that, rather than if you're saying, here's the way I'm understanding it, and here's what I bring to it, here's how I understand it, so that you're then seeing it not as me, but that these are my experiences. So then you can then join another person with not just the idea that they have, but the context in which they have it. What's the background? What have the been experiences that I've had that bring me to this moment? And so in that way, you begin to sort of peel back the layers of yourself to get to really interacting in that, and you can see it in that way. So it's no longer connected to who you are, and you have a context, and you appreciate the fact that your life experiences and mine are very different, and therefore that's the filter that we bring. And if you can recognize that, then you can embrace, then you can start to see things more clearly if you peel back those filters.
Yeah.
That actually, at first when you started talking about objectifying or depersonalizing the information, in a sense, I was resistant to it a little bit, because I felt like I want to know the person who has this perspective, and I wasn't thinking of it as oppositional per se. Like I write music, and recently a friend of mine online connected me to another songwriter who wrote a song with the same title as mine, and I started to get to know this person, and I want to ask him more about how he writes. And I don't want to know just objectively the information in a sense. I want to know who he is and why he writes the way he does, because both of our songs are very different, you know.
And even what that title means to him is
Yeah.
very different than
Yeah.
what that title means to you.
But even in that process, it's about coming together as opposed to creating a standoff, which I think is beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, Rabbi, a few minutes ago, you said that Chokhmah is at the top of the tree.
Yes.
And it makes sense. I was thinking that it was near the top of the tree, and that it made sense for me to think of it as near the top of the tree because it opens to receive.
Mm-hmm.
But, so my question is, I think of Keter as the top of the tree.
Yes.
And could you speak for a moment about why you leave, in this context, Keter out?
Yeah, Keter is almost like the super consciousness. It's beyond what we're typically processing in a cognitive way. And in truth, it says that Chachma is open to what? To Keter. In other words, Keter is almost the transcendent. On every level, Keter means transcendence, because Keter is the Hebrew word for crown. So what is a crown by definition? A physical crown. A crown is that which lies above the head. So if the head represents the intellectual, right, the intellect, the brain, the mind is seated in the head. So the crown that lies above that is that which is beyond intellect. Kind of like this mysterious, and it can take on many different forms. Keter could be understood in different ways. It could be a powerful desire that we can't even understand. It's not something that's a product of an intellectual decision, but it's some deep-seated desire or a deep-seated sense of pleasure. These are different forms of Keter. It could also be a super rational idea, something that's not an idea that's not formulated from what we know already, but something that exists outside of our experience and knowledge. Like I spoke about a little bit last week about all the information that's out there in the universe that's beyond what we know. We might also term that as Keter. So when I said that Chachma is about the openness to the beyond, it's not only to someone else's opinion, but it's also to what's higher than it, which in this context would be loosely translated as Keter. What's interesting is that where we're up to on page 10, chapter 5, he's actually going to get into Keter right now and talk about the difference between Keter and Chachma. And this is going to raise a very... No, not this one. Take this one. Sorry. This is the next one. Anybody who needs let me know if you need a copy. Okay, pass this down. Get more. Oh wait, not this. Does anybody else need a copy? Yeah? Okay. Page 10. Now, I'm out of copies right now of the text that we're going to finish. I have the booklets for the next...
Wait a minute, I don't think you have that.
You don't have chapter 5, page 10?
On this one, well, page 10 is not your page 10.
There should only be one page 10. Oh, is there another copy?
Chapter 1, is that correct?
Yeah, it begins with chapter 1. Yeah, that's it.
Oh, this
That's
is,
it.
oh,
You're looking, it's that page, not that.
oh, on that page, not that other tab. Well, excuse me.
As long as everyone's cool. Is there? Okay. Good. So, I want to mention one more thing very, very quickly by way of introduction, and that is, in Kabbalah, this is kind of a general tip. You will find, oftentimes, things explained in contradictory ways. You'll be learning something about Chachma in one text, and then you'll learn something else about Chachma in a different text, and it might seem to be a contradiction. No. Listen, Erica, how many years have you been in Kabbalah Coffee? You've been here for a lot of years. You've heard so many contradictions. No, but I just want to explain about contradictions. They're not actually contradictions. Because here's the understanding. When you're explaining something in a certain context, oftentimes you're explaining it relative to something else. Right? So on a very simple level, is this cup higher or lower Is it above or below?
Then what?
Aha, you're on to me. Right? So relative to the Mevo camera, it's above. Relative to the ceiling, it's below. So imagine if you're learning about this cup, and in one text it says it's high. It's the highest, or higher. And the other text says it's lower. So which one is right?
Depends.
So in Yiddish, the expression is sevenzich vumeret, which is a wonderful way of saying it depends. It's all about what context you're discussing. Sevenzich vumeret, it depends on where you're talking about. So relative to this, it's higher. Relative to that, it's lower. But because we have different texts, we're able to put it into context. Imagine if you only have one text and you think the cup is the highest thing. So that's why, for example, for Chachma, Chachma is the highest. But not when we talk about Keter, because it's below Keter. So that's why we need all of these texts to put the whole picture together to really have a sense of where things stack. So, the chapter 5 begins with him saying that Chachma is objective. Chachma is, objective, but Chachma is bittul. Chachma is letting go of ego. Chachma is all about wisdom that's beyond what you know. It's all about being open and objective. It's all about beyond self. So Chachma is the, Midjan is conflict, ego. Chachma is the antithesis of ego, of conflict. Chachma is letting go of self, which fosters the ability to unite and to create love and unity. Fantastic. Page 10, second paragraph, this statement. This statement, and he here in Yiddish again, bavarens. You know what bavaren means? He forewarns a question that a person might ask. Preempts a question that a person might ask. And he says, this statement does not contradict the concept that division begins on the level of intellect. He just said, and intellect here means chachma. So he just said that division is not present in chachma, because chachma is all about letting go of self, which fosters a possibility for uniting. So he says, what about, I'll ask it as a question. He's saying it's not a question, but let me just pose it as a question. It says in other sources, though, that intellect is where division begins. And he quotes, no Torah are. He quotes an earlier mystical text, which Torah are literally means the light of Torah, or the Torah is light. It's a mystical work on the Torah. No Torah are toward the end of the discourse entitled the Kaballah Yehudim, on the verse, and Israel encamped. So he's just telling you where he's taking this from, this apparent contradiction, where, it says over there, where the singular form of the verb implies that they encamped all together as one man, as one human being. Let me explain. This verse that the other mystical text discusses, this verse comes from the book of Exodus. After the Exodus from Egypt, after the 10 plagues and the splitting of the sea, the Jews march to the foot of Mount Sinai. What's going to happen at Mount Sinai? They're going to receive the Torah, the 10 Commandments. 10 Commandments and then the rest of the Torah subsequently. So the Torah tells us that they arrived on that day that they arrived at the mountain, they arrived. And then it says, Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Hahar. Israel encamped there opposite the mountain, right across, facing the mountain. It says, Vayichan Sham Yisrael, Israel encamped there by the mountain. Here's the problem. In Hebrew, you can say, so every verb can be singular or plural. So Vayichan is singular. Vayachanu is plural. It's kind of like y'all and all y'all. Okay, right? So Vayichan is singular. Vayachanu is plural, and yet the Torah says Vayichan Sham Yisrael, that Israel, in the singular, he or it, as a singular unit, encamped there. And the commentaries say, why does it use the singular? Because it's telling us that when the Jewish people encamped at the foot of Mount Sinai, they weren't many different people, but but they were in a state of incredible and intense unity. In the language of the commentaries, ki ish echad belev echad, like one ish, like one person with one heart. So although they were 2 or 3 million people strong, they were totally unified in purpose, in mission, in emotion, in feeling, in ideology. They were so united, they were like one person. Hence the Torah says, Vayichan Sham. He camped there. Not he gender specific, but the singular camped there. Why singular? Because they were like one. That's what it says in Torah. That's classic commentary. That's not Kabbalah yet. Let's continue. That essay, the Kabbalistic essay, explains that their unity resulted from the attribute of Ratzon Pashut, simple will, which transcends reason. It says in Kabbalah, he's quoting, it says in Kabbalah that how were the Jewish people able to unite as one by the foot of Mount Sinai and not have, you know what they say, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. Some say 2 Jews, 5 opinions. But they only say that because they have a different opinion. Anyway, right, so how could you get to a how can you get to a state of unity with so many different people? So it says in Kabbalah, it's because they were channeling, they were connected with Ratzon Pashut, which is translated here as simple will. I don't know if I like the translation. That's kind of a literal translation. Ratzon is will and Pashut is simple will. It means, what does it mean? What's a good way of translating it? It means a non-complex or non-composite desire. It's not a complicated desire. It's not a multifaceted desire. They had a very straightforward, essential desire, and all of them shared the same thing, the same desire. And that was the unifying force. It's because each one didn't come to the experience of Mount Sinai with their own ideas of what it was going to be. Because if they came with their own ideas, there would be 2 or 3 million different people encamped at the foot of the mountain, and they would not be on the same page. They would each have their own notion or their own idea of what that was going to be or what they wanted it to be. Maybe I'll leave out want. Of what they thought it might be. But their Ratzon Pashut, their simple, indivisible, pure, essential desire was the same. They all wanted to receive this incredible divine communication at Mount Sinai. That's what they wanted. How they would understand it would differ between each person. So they wouldn't be alike in their intelligence, in their minds, but on the level of pure desire, pure will, they were all the same. Pure will, Ratzon Pashut, or simple will, is Keter. Straight up Keter. That's higher than Chacham. It's like the crown. So on a level of pure will, that's where their unity came from. Their unity stemmed not from an intellectual coalescence or unity. It was from a ratzon, from a desire, from a place of pure desire. They were on the same page. It's like the desire to go to Orlando. Right? That desire is the same amongst all the family members. But now the question is, are we going to go, theoretically, this is all a theoretical exercise. But now the question is, are we going to Epcot, Magic Kingdom, Universal Studios, right? Now we have all these different ideas and notions of what the best way might look like. There are more theme parks now. I'm like stuck 20 years ago. Huh? Gatorland. Somebody told me that the prices to somebody told me yesterday that Universal Studios is pushing $180. Did you hear this? Is this true? A person. Is this true? Is this verified? I remember when it was like what, $80, $75, $100,
Cheaper.
still expensive. Still right. I remember when it was cheaper. Unbelievable. I should have bought all those tickets then. I could have sold them now. Forget about it. Just kidding.
Could have made a killing.
Could have made a killing. Unbelievable. Yeah. Yeah, it's not a great example. It's the only thing that came to my head. Sorry. We were talking about Orlando yesterday. Somebody told me about Orlando, so now it's in my head. Wonderful. Yeah, so on a level of Ratzon Pashut, again, Ratzon Pashut is called simple will because it's not yet formulated. It's just like a pure desire for something, but not yet articulated and broken down into what that specifically would look like. So on that level, many people can share the same pure desire because it's not yet fleshed out. But once it gets dissected in the mind, we understand it, we see it a certain way. Now there's diversity. Now there's maybe dissenting opinions. It didn't like that I clapped. It said clipped audio. Sorry. I'll speak softly. Okay. So getting back to the point here. That text tells us that it's Ratzon Pashut that's indivisible, that's pure, that's egoless. Whereas intellect, intelligence, even Chachma, is filled with division. So what's going on? You with me on the question? Yes? Right?
What was the question?
We've been saying, right, for a week and a half, we've been saying that Chachma is no ego. Chachma is pure objectivity, and therefore Chachma is unity. And this other discourse says, no. Unity is beyond intelligence, because once things hit the mind, already there's division between two people. So which one is it? Is it objective or subjective? Will the real mind please stand up? Let's continue. There are divisions. We're still in the brackets. There are divisions on the level of intellect. When it comes to intelligence, we do have divisions amongst human beings, as the Talmud comments. I'm sorry, we're not in the brackets. What am I saying? All right. Does everyone see where we are? Doesn't matter what I'm saying at this point, as long as you know where we are. Okay. There are divisions on the level of intellect. As the Talmud comments, the minds of all are not the same. In other words, people's minds are different. Each person is different from every other insofar as their powers of intellect, understanding, and knowledge are concerned. Furthermore, the nature of intellect is... First point is, everyone understands and sees things differently. That's point number one. Point number two, furthermore, the nature of intellect is to limit each thing so that it can be grasped intellectually. The nature of the mind is to define, create definitions. Because without definitions, how do we understand? You only understand by creating some sort of structure around the ideas, an intellectual structure, around the ideas that you're thinking about, that you're trying to understand, which implies separation and division. You're creating borders around the idea so that you can grasp it. Wonderful. You just demarcated it. You just created a box. And creating a box means you're creating division. Something can be grasped only when there are 6 extremities, spatial points of reference to hold on to. He doesn't mean literally, right? 6 spatial references, 6 spatial points are in the physical universe. Everything has, right, front, right? 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 directions plus up and down. Everything is surrounded by 6 directions. He says here also intellectually. For the mind to grasp something, to get something, again, in a obviously the mind doesn't have hands or tentacles to grasp, but for the mind to get something, it has to somehow create a surface that it grasps. Similarly, he's speaking physically. Let me go back. Something can be grasped physically only when there are 6 extremities, spatial points of reference to hold on to. So physically, you can grasp something when it has surface. Similarly, for a concept to be grasped by the intellect, it must be defined. So number one, people see things differently, people understand things differently. Number two, intelligence, the process of intelligence, of intellectual activity, of understanding, of grasping, is only due to creating... Slipped into some Talmudic sing-song there.
Like
Yeah? It only due to when you create spatial constructs in an intellectual fashion. Furthermore, it is a prime function of intellect to analyze any given matter into all its detailed components. The mind gets very detailed to understand all the details, which are by nature separate pieces in order to understand it. Hence, okay. Yeah. I'm not sure why they did this. Hence is now the answer. That was just the question, hence is the answer, but hence does not usually indicate an answer. But it does now. He made a point, just so everyone's on the same page here. He starts off this chapter by saying, Chachma is not subjective, it's objective, and there's no ego, it's not about you, it's about the idea. Great. Kumbaya. Wonderful. Then he says, 1 second, not so fast. In another mystical text it says that only ratzon pashut, only simple will is objective. The mind, however, is subjective. And now he answers. Here's the answer. Hence doesn't work. Although it appears, based on the question we were just asked, that intellect is characterized by division, however, this is the answer, this division functions through, beginning with, I'm adding words here to make this work, the power of bina, comprehension, which is kind of what I alluded to last week as we discussed this. The real idea of the division of intellect, understanding it, grasping it, understanding it differently than someone else, all of what we just said about the mind and painting it as a very subjective tool, that really begins from bina down, not really from chachma, which is characterized by the above ability to grasp a concept intellectually through breaking it down into many individual parts. In contrast, at the level of chachma, although the concept has already become an intellectual entity, so although you can say at the level of chachma that there is an idea here, it's not yet super vague, that it's not yet defined as an idea, it is an idea, it is not yet grasped or comprehended. Rather, as is known from other sources, it is perceived as a general point without division and organization into components. So what he says here is, relative to ratzon pasha, to simple will, all intellect, all intelligence is subjective. Relative to bina, chachma is objective. Are you with me? It's like the cup, right? It's lower than the ceiling, but it's above the camera. So chachma is lower than keter, is lower than ratzon, pure, undefined, indivisible will. The Jews gathered at the foot of the mountain and they were all in desire on the same page. They weren't thinking, they were just feeling something deep inside. So on that level they were all on the same page. Whereas if it was about their minds, they would have been different. But even within the mind, the main division, the primary division that constitutes breaking down a concept, defining a concept, and seeing a concept necessarily different than the way someone else does this process, that is primarily found in bina down, and chachma up, whereas chachma remains a little bit above that fray of subjectivity. So again, relative to ratzon, which is pure will and desire, chachma is also somewhat subjective, but relative to bina, it's objective. So is it subjective or objective? Depends what you're referencing it to. But relative, in our conversation, to the rest of the 9 sefirot, below it, we can say that chachma is that point of objectivity within the person. And our original point still stands. That where within the construct of the 10 sefirot, not including keter, but where in the context of the 10 sefirot do human beings possess the power of letting go of ego? It's not about self, not about how I understand it, it's about objectivity, it's about seeing things the way they are, not the way I am. Where does that exist? Where does that power stem from? Within the 10 sefirot construct, chachma. Make sense?
Well, it sounds like
I didn't even wait for an answer. Yes.
Joseph Campbell would say that there are these symbols
The
that
soup
are
guy?
yes, that are
Different Campbell.
that are universal and part of the collective unconscious, which would be maybe in the realm of keter, perhaps,
Yeah.
And then the ability to recognize those symbols individually might be where it occurs as chachma, but it isn't broken down into its component.
Right, so that's where we're straddling a little bit of tension within chachma, because there is an understanding on the individual is getting it, but not
Right.
breaking it down and defining it to the point where it's full division, and now potentially divisive vis-a-vis somebody else. So it's not in its pure original form beyond Chachma.
Right.
It still
exists in an individual, in a person. It still exists in an individual.
That's what he says.
mind
At the level of Chachma, although the concept has already become an intellectual entity within the person. In other words,
right.
you're now getting something, but it's still not yet defined. Look, the best way I can put it, I said this last week also, is that moment of intellectual intuition where you know you got it, but you can't yet explain it. It's like you know that you just got something, but you haven't fleshed it out yet, even in your own mind. It's like that aha moment. Aha! Give me a second. Right? Aha! I can't explain it yet, but I know I got it. And we know we got it, right? It's like you know that you just got something. Yeah? One example that I've used before in other classes is so many notifications the whole time. You notice that?
There's a lot of busy people trying to weigh in.
I don't know. One way that I've taught this before is imagine you're in Paris. Oh, that'd be so nice, right? Let's just go to Paris. Imagine you're in Paris and you've never been there. And you decide to go off the main road and walk into one of the small Parisian streets. Are there, Sandrine, I'm going to turn to you now because you're our expert. Are there small streets in Paris? I'm assuming I've never been there. Yeah, we. That's awesome. Okay, so imagine you pull off the main road, and you pull off to the small street. It's not well lit, and then suddenly, as you turn onto the street, or as you're a little bit deep into the street, suddenly there's a blackout in the city. All the lights go out, and now you're alone on the small windy street, and you're not really sure where to go, and you're getting a little bit apprehensive, and then suddenly, because the lights went out because there was a storm, see, I'm building this narrative here. So because the lights went out because of a storm, so the next moment or a few moments later, there's a big lightning flash in the sky, big lightning bolt in the sky, and for a split second, everything illuminates, and you see clearly everything for a moment, and then it goes dark once again. And now what do you have to do? If you want to get back to where you need to go, you have to recreate in your mind, or recreate what you just saw in that momentary flash, and weave your way back to where you needed to go. Something like that. So the point is that Chachma is the flash that goes off, that allows us to see another reality. And then our minds have to reconstruct that and to understand it. So that moment of intellectual intuition or intellectual conception, we got it, like we see the idea, we see the concept, we see whatever it is, we see something, and then the minds have to work it through. That's where Bina comes in. But Chachma is still seeing something, it's still me seeing something. So on one level, it's still somewhat subjective relative to beyond me seeing, which is Ratzon, pure desire, which is not like selfish desire, it's like the pure level of desire. But relative to Bina, which is me understanding it and figuring it out for myself, by myself, it's definitely subjective.
So that purity is never, once Bina kicks in.
Yeah, it's never pure again.
Purity is lost.
Purity is lost.
Has to be lost because we've talked about this before with language, is that you're limited to the way in which you can characterize it.
100%.
So just
If only we could have Chachma all day. Well, I don't know. I don't know if that's a thing.
Well, yeah, now
You might not get
it's
anything
nice.
done if you had Chachma.
Right.
Yeah.
I can see clearly now. The rain is. Yeah.
When
I said that's what the 60s were.
Oh yeah.
So Chachma, never mind.
All right. Let's continue to the end of chapter 5, or let's continue. Page 11. The ultimate goal of the above analysis, undertaken by Chachma and intellect, is synthesis. I love this. He now adds a new point, and this is the point that I started off the class with, which is why I'm glad that we're getting here right now. He says the ultimate point or objective of Chachma and intellect, in other words, and the subsequent powers of intellect, ultimately are all about synthesis. In other words, even though we said Bina, the Bina process is about division, right? We just said that Bina is breaking something down, defining it, creating parameters around which I can grasp in Bina, not in Chachma, I can grasp intellectually the concept. Although we said that, and that's true, what's the goal? There's two things. There's process and purpose. The process of Chachma, a little bit, but mainly Bina, is definition and division and understanding. But what's the goal? He says the ultimate goal and purpose of the above analysis undertaken by Chachma and intellect is synthesis. There's two types of division he's trying to say. There's division for the sake of division and division for the sake of unity. Sometimes you divide something to be separated out, and sometimes you divide it to put those pieces back together. It wasn't by chance that I gave the example of a puzzle before. It was because I wanted to put together a piece from the beginning of the class with the end of the class, like a puzzle, where you start off with a single image, and then you cut it with a jigsaw, into different pieces. You say I've used jigsaws many times in my life. Cut it into different pieces, and the objective is that it should come together again. The ultimate goal of Chachma, or at least the way Chachma sees Bina, are you with me on this? Maybe not the way Bina sees itself, but the way Chachma, egoless Chachma, sees the rest of the intellectual faculties, which are about division. The way it sees the purpose of the rest is that there will be division, but the goal should be to then bring it together. So let's say for myself, I think about Kabbalah and coffee, and I think about, what do I want everyone to walk out with? What's the point that I want everyone to walk out with? And I have in my mind, here's the central idea. Here's the one point that I want everyone to really get. Great. How are we going to get there? Point A, point B, point C, point D, point E, point F. I have 5, 6, 7 ideas that we have to get to, that when we put it all together, we get to the central point. It starts off as a point and it ends ideally. There's one point in the beginning and ideally one point at the end, but the process in the middle sometimes requires to divide ideas out and to make sure each piece is understood. Then we go to the next piece, and then the next piece, and then the next piece, so that everyone can put all the ideas together. The way Chachma, are you with me on this? The way Chachma envisions the role of intelligence, of Bina and downward, the way Chachma sees all of that process is to break it down, to bring it together. That's why the division, even on a deeper level, the division of Bina is also not so subjective. It's also, at least seen through the lens of Chachma, also about synthesis. Let's continue inside 11. The ultimate goal, I'm going to read it again for the third time. The ultimate goal of the above analysis undertaken by Chachma and intellect is synthesis. In general, there are two types of division. The first is a division which causes separation. For example, the division of the essential soul powers from each other. He's talking about the original division of the soul powers in the close to the essence of the soul as those soul powers evolve within the human soul. Right? So the soul begins in an essential state, and then it evolves, the soul evolves into having 10 distinct powers. So that evolution, or that division of a singularity of soul into 10 distinct powers and faculties, Chachma, Bina, Dat, etc., that division is for the sake of division. It's divided to have 10 distinct powers. So the first division which causes separation, for example, the division of the essential soul powers from each other. These powers are in their essence different from each other, and there is no bond, connection, or point of unity between them. In other words, for example, he gives an example, the qualities of chesed and gevura, chesed being love or openness, giving, and gevura being restraint, withholding, right? Severity, sternness, strictness, they are in essence absolutely separate and distinct from each other. These are two completely different soul powers and soul faculties. So you go from an essence, an essential singularity state of the soul, to chesed and gevura. That's a split and a division that's designed for the sake of separation. If they would be revealed in their essence as they are in the realm of tohu, they could not tolerate each other. In other words, if you get to the essence of chesed and the essence of gevura, there's not necessarily oneness, there is separation, which is why in the world of chaos, the world of tohu, that's why there was this shattering of the vessels, because they couldn't get along, because each one was so amped up and so 100% of its own identity, and it couldn't get along with the other. For there, in that realm of tohu, of chaos, the sephiros were revealed in their simple state, again, simple meaning pure state, on the sharply defined and perfectly distinct level of akudim. Akudim is a mystical term that means as things are in a level of points of separation, and not let's say circles of connection, but rather points of division, and were thus opposed to each other and in conflict. Again, just a lot of Kabbalistic concepts here, but here's the main point. The soul powers, as they originally divide, are divided in order to create separation, and each one on its own is very much distinct from the other, and they're meant to be distinct. And that's why the world of chaos, the world of tohu, there was this explosion, there was a shattering of the vessels, because they couldn't get along. They were all on the level of akudim. Akudim means, again, points, distinct points, not circles of connection, but points of division, and therefore they were opposed and in conflict to each other. The second type, that's one type of division for the sake of division. The second type of division is one which leads to synthesis. This occurs when a single entity is broken down into different components. If you take one idea and you break it down into components, although now you have many components, those components are essentially unified. And the goal of the division is perhaps to show an even greater unity than the unity that existed pre-division. Because what can show a greater level of unity than the unity that's born of division that still is unified despite the division? Are you with me? A unity that was never divided, how do you know how strong the unity is? But when you've divided it and you can still unify it, or it is still in a unified state, then you know it's really unified. That's the true test of unity, if it can withstand this division. So there's two types of division. There's division that's real division to create separation, and then there's division that stems from unity and is destined to achieve unity. Let me just wrap this up and then we'll discuss for a second. Now he talks about both levels. When two things are different, their differences cause division. But when one single entity is divided into many particular factors, the division itself causes unity. Again, the best example that I can think of now in the context of education and teaching is when you take a concept, a single concept, and you divide it into different pieces, different steps of learning. The sake of that division is not to confuse the student, is not to teach them different points, it's to teach them one point. But the process is, you need division to get to that state of singularity. Right? So you tell a story, you tell an anecdote, you give a teaching, you weave it together. The whole point is this, but all to lead to one place, singularity. Make sense? So now I feel pressure to bring everything together. But I don't feel compelled, although I feel pressure. Yeah.
When I was reading that, I was thinking about also that in one way, if you think of it as division, they're each disparate. But then if you think about unity, you think of it as a system, because they're actually all working together.
Correct.
So it's unified in terms of the interdependency.
Yes.
And so that's another, I think it's another view of, because I understand yours as well, if you're trying to read a word, you're going to break it down into parts.
Sesame Street style.
And at the same time, there's also an interdependency of all the different parts, because if you left one out or you pronounced it incorrectly, then the whole would not be represented.
How cool would that be if we looked at other people's opinions And instead of seeing something that we don't like, we said we can't understand our opinion if we don't see theirs. How cool would that be? That would be a game changer. Oh well. No, I'm kidding. Wouldn't that be amazing? If we had that humility, and that's what it comes down to. It comes down to eliminating the ego. If we had the ability to tell it, not the ability, if we truly saw the other person's opinion, very different than us, as being essential to ourselves. Although it sounds a little bit ego-driven.
So when you were talking about the dots, the level of Pagim, I was thinking of the 7 kings of Edom, and
Mm-hmm.
the 7 kings of Edom represent the 7 Medot, and maybe they disappeared because the kings existed at the level of...
Those 7 kings of Edom, first of all, we read about them yesterday at the end of the Torah portion. Talks about all the kings of Edom that lived and passed away and died. And that's where Kabbalah picks up that idea, and that's absolutely the world of Tohu. The 7 kings of Edom are Tohu. Chaos. Yeah. So, in conclusion, we have a choice. We have a choice. Look, it all comes down to a choice. Because at its core, we choose which world we live in. Do you live in the world of Midjan or the world of Moses? Do you live in the world of Tohu or the world of Tikkun? There's a world of Tohu out there. Yeah, it's the primordial world that shattered and broke, but it's still here. It's all around us. The results of Tohu are all around us. Those broken shards are everywhere we go. Don't walk barefoot. No, I'm kidding. Those broken shards are everywhere we go. The sparks of light are everywhere. The question is, do you look at different sparks and say, different sparks, disunity, fragmentation, division, I don't like it, it's not like me, it's not my spark, your spark is different than my spark, and we create and we just perpetuate that conflict? Or do we choose to see unity within the division, and to maybe see the division on its deepest level as intended for the sake of unity, for the sake of showing us a piece of the puzzle that we could not see on our own because we have a limited vision. So instead of looking at the other person as the antagonist or as the enemy, look at them as the teacher, as someone who can share a perspective that I simply don't have on my own. That would be a powerful way of looking at the world. One more lesson. Just not like a new lesson, but a related lesson. I look over there because in the corner behind the tree, you might be able to see that there's a menorah candelabra. And it's, for Hanukkah, it has 8 branches for 8 nights, and one in the center that's taller. It's modeled somewhat, not exactly, it's modeled somewhat after the menorah in the ancient holy temple, the Beit HaMikdash. But as you may know, in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple, there were not 8 branches or 9 branches. There were 7 branches. 3 on each side, and 1 in the center. And the one in the center wasn't taller, because it wasn't like our Hanukkah menorah that we have a helper candle or whatever it is. We have other reasons why we have that 9th. 8 for the days and 9th, for another reason. There were 7 lamps, 7 equal height branches. The Kabbalists tell us that the 7 branches of the menorah correspond to the 7 personality traits, the emotional traits, from not the intellectual 3 powers, but the 7 lower of the 10 sefirot, the 10 soul powers, the 7 lower emotional powers. And here's the message. Each one has its own branch. There's a person who's chesed. They go through life. Their primary modality is love. You have people who are disciplinarians for themselves, for others, gevura. You have tiferet, compassion, netzach, ambition, hod, humility. You have different types of different personalities. And we can go through life seeing the other person as the opposite. And maybe even, God forbid, the enemy. Someone who's not like me, I don't get them, they don't get me, and there's conflict and division. The Torah tells us that the ancient, I have a cup of water here, might as well drink, that the menorah in the temple was made to be hammered of a single piece of gold. Miksha zahav, it says. Not meant to be welded together of different pieces. You create a center stem and then weld together the branches, but hammered from a solid block of gold. You hammer it out until it produces these branches. Why? Who cares? So you ask Apple, they'll tell you unibody construction is the strongest. Maybe God wanted a very strong unibody construction menorah. Maybe Steve Jobs and et al., maybe they got their inspiration from the menorah. I don't know. But here's what I know. Here's what Kabbalah teaches. That we all come from the same place, and we all share the same essence. We're all hewn from the same block of gold. We're all from the same place of oneness. And even as we emanate into very different branches, and I might be on one side of the menorah, candelabra, on the furthest side, and you may be all the way on the other side, but we all come from the same place, and here's the kicker, we all share the same purpose, which is to bring light. Thank you very much for joining me today for Kabbalah Coffee.
I Googled Keter.
One love.
One love. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it says, it came up and it said, with Keter, you can make any space amazing. They're plastic buildings.
That's hilarious.
How'd you like it?
Keter can do so many things. All right, a few quick announcements once again. Oh, next week, what's next Sunday's date? What's today's date? 22nd. Are we around the 22nd? Yes?
Yes.
All right, class is on next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Okay, next, December 25th, join us for a lecture titled Christianity and the Talmud, followed by menorah lighting on the Beltline, followed by a Chinese dinner, catered Chinese dinner. Let me know if you're coming. You can sign up online. Adults and children are welcome. We have family, we have kids programming throughout the lecture time. There's going to be fun activities for kids. Join us and tell your friends to join us. Demand that they join you. Also, kidding, don't demand. Also, finally, one final announcement. I mentioned this before the class. I'll mention it once again. Life After Hate, the story of T.M. Garrett, a fellow who's from Germany, who was a white supremacist and a KKK leader, who completely turned his life around, and now he's an author and human rights activist, and he has an organization that's dedicated to helping people get out of hate groups. He also has, part of his organization is helping people cover up their hate tattoos. Because a lot of people some people have tattoos prominently displayed on their bodies with hate symbols. So he helps people deal with that as well, with cover-ups and whatnot. So he's a tremendous individual, and he'll be speaking here one night only, Monday, January 13th. Please join us and tell your friends as well.
You should have bought the $100 tickets. They're $119 now.
What is that?
Universal Studios.
It's only 119? Did I get fake news? I heard 180.
This is universalorlando.com.
Yeah. Interesting.
Primary source.
Well then,
That could be a teaser price.
that could be